So happy Tuesday, everyone. And come on, PowerPoint. There we are. All right, so on the line we have Mark Sr. from PointFuse, Mike Deacon from PointFuse, Sean Hester from Revizto, and then myself, Sean Phillips. I am the Midwest Sales Manager for Revizto in the US, living in Chicago, enjoying a lovely summer day. I'll let Mark, Mike, and Sean introduce themselves, and then we'll get into this PowerPoint.
Thanks, Sean. My name's Mark Senior. I'm the Regional Sales Director for PointFuse, and I'll be here to sort of help out with questions and answers on this session today. So thank you very much for your time today.
Hey everyone, I'm Mike Deacon, also from PointFuse, coming kind of just outside London in the UK today. And again, I'll be giving a presentation and a couple of workflow videos a little bit later on. But yeah, again, thank you.
And my name is Sean Hester. I'm the implementation specialist for all of our North American construction customers here at Revizto. So thank you, and thanks again for PointFuse for joining us across the pond. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Our pleasure.
All right, so let's jump into it. So already knocked out point number one on the agenda. Second thing we're going to start discussing is how to make scanning functional, especially given the work circumstances many of us are facing with working remotely, not able to get onto sites, not having those face-to-face meetings. It's harder to actually get a sense of what's going on job sites and really, see what work is being done and connect with teams and show everyone what's going on. So the bulk of this focus is how PointFuse takes large scan data, boils it down to a very functional mesh, and then from there we're going to discuss how those meshes can be leveraged in a platform like Revizto, where you have access to the mesh, the model, 2D, and how that improves team communication so you keep your projects on schedule and resolve issues in a much faster fashion. So let's go ahead and jump into, hey, sounds great, Sean. How does it all work? I'll go ahead and I'll let Mike take it from here, and I'll be responsible for clicking the slides for him.
Thank you very much, Sean. Yeah, so the purpose of kind of me being here today, this first kind of 10 minutes, is to talk through how you can sort of take this data that we're capturing on site. Then we've got icons there for a variety of different scanning technologies. So whether we're using handheld SLAM technology, whether we've got tripod-based laser scanning. How can we convert this point cloud data that's coming back from site all the time into a format that's a little bit more usable than just that raw point cloud? And so by that I mean converting it into data that everybody can recognize. So with the best will in the world, not everybody that's involved in a project is going to truly understand what they're looking at when they're looking at a point cloud, and they can also be quite big and cumbersome and generally quite difficult to work with. So over the next kind of 10 minutes or so, I'm going to walk through what we do at PointFuse, or what PointFuse software does in order to manage that point cloud data and convert it, as I say, into a format that we can use. I've lost the PowerPoint my end.
Yeah, I can't see the PowerPoint.
Uh-oh.
Hang on. Zoom stopped my screen share. 1 second. It's not a Zoom meeting if something doesn't go wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. I'll keep going though. So while the slides comes up. So here we go. So an overview of just as an overview of what PointFuse is, just for those of you who aren't familiar with the software, it's a desktop application that converts point cloud data into 3D mesh models. So if you could take on to the next slide, please, Sean. But it's a little bit unique in terms of meshing. So that, there's lots of different ways of producing mesh models that are out there. But what we do at PointFuse is a little bit different. So first of all, we can take data from all of those different scanners that I mentioned earlier. So we don't require structured data. We can actually, we can mesh data coming in from the BLK2Go or tripod-based scanners, the whole lot. So we can convert all of the information coming back from site into our mesh format. The other thing that makes it unique is that within this single meshing process, we perform a level of optimization. So I'll come onto that in a little bit more detail in a minute. What it means is we're producing very lightweight mesh models by reducing triangulation on where there's very simple geometry, but keeping a kind of denser triangulation where there's detail. So we're producing this kind of best of both worlds where we've got very efficient triangulation where we need it, but without impacting the quality of the visuals. So we're producing meshes that are very accurate compared to the point cloud. But the kind of main sort of unique element of a PointFuse mesh is that it's segmented. And so by that I mean, within this single meshing process, the mesh itself is broken up based on changes in geometry. So it's producing this mesh that's kind of split up into its component parts. So you can, as I'll show shortly in the video, you can select on elements and isolate them. So that's the kind of high level. So before I go into the workflow, this first video here is actually a workflow that we put together with one of our customers, Clark Construction, also out of Chicago, Sean. And I just wanted to use this as an example of just some of the metrics that they're getting back from site, which are, they've got, the example that they used was a 110 gigabyte scan data that they produced using a Faro scanner. And the metrics in terms of producing usable data from that information was they're saying for every day of scanning, they've got a day of registration, and then they've got half a day of creating this mesh model and dropping it into Revizto. So the time taken to create this mesh data compared to the scanning time is, what's that, a quarter? But the key is they've turned this 110 gigabyte piece of scan data into a 3 gigabyte FBX that we can drop into Revizto and kind of move around with pretty easily. So I've sort of dropped behind the video a little bit there, but what I'm showing here is some of the key kind of steps of the production of this mesh. And so the initial kind of screenshot you were looking at there was the workflow wizard. So within PointFuse, we have everything runs off a single initial process. So we can work straight from the raw data. So in this case, we're going from a recap file. And we can, from that recap file, choose some mesh conversion settings. And so again here, just coming back to all the different scanning technologies that we can convert using PointFuse. Actually, straight away in the software, we've got predetermined settings based upon those different scanning technologies. So in terms of making the software easy to use, we've got these preset settings. So you don't have to worry about changing any of the kind of complicated sounding parameters. Also within that single process, we produce a texture file so that we can read the signs on site. And that uses, again, the RGB values of the point cloud. So using all the intelligence that the point cloud's collected and mapping that to the mesh. And then we also, the process itself of converting that data is multi-threaded. So that's how we can convert 110 gigabyte point cloud, for example, on a desktop in a few hours into this mesh model. And actually for Clark Construction's workflow, there's really no contact points. So again, within this initial wizard structure, we're defining the output format as well. So for this initial workflow here, choosing FBX, because we can drop that straight into Revizto and press finish. And what that does is that's actually the full workflow for Clark. They set it up and they leave it, and by the time they get back to it, it's complete and it's finished, and they can work with the data. So just to show a couple of those kind of concepts in PointFuse. By switching on the wireframe, you can kind of see what I was talking about with the optimization. So on that piece of pipe work on the right-hand side there's much denser triangulation compared to the walls and floors. So that's how we're achieving that real compression in file size. But then again, by selecting those pipes, you can see that segmentation's already happened. So within that single mesh process, you can already see how you can start breaking down that information into kind of relevant classes. And so all of this combines into this easy to use piece of software that can be, you can get an output within a single process. If you take me to the next slide, please, Sean. So you can do a little bit more to it. So you can, from there, as I said, you've got that FBX file that you can drop straight in. So within, without touching it at all, you've got the data that you can use. But actually that segmentation is a pretty useful tool as well, because you can start to, rather than just selecting and isolating as I did in that video, you can actually start to apply a classification. And so this second video, if you want to start the video, please, Sean. I'll kind of show you how that process works. So what we're doing here is applying what is essentially an Ifc classification template that ships with the software to the mesh model. And so we kind of use Ifc as the kind of industry standard within the industry to kind of classify into. What it means is that any classification that we perform, so I'm now going to select and classify some of these elements into a plumbing layer. It means that all of this classification gets maintained all the way through. So hopefully when Sean shows you this data in Revizto shortly, he's going to be able to click on some of this mesh information actually in the Revizto platform and view that classification. So it's a process of kind of identifying some of these key features, as I've done here, just kind of jumping ahead. And so this has a doubling effect. So you can use this just very simply to remove noise. So you can already start to reduce the file size in that way. And you can also clean up the space so everybody's a bit more familiar of what they're looking at. Alternatively, because we're building up this layering structure, you can also kind of isolate specific trades, for example. So here I've just the kind of plumbing trade, isolated those. And you can start exporting these individual, these kind of individual layers as individual files. So again, reducing the file size, you're only exporting exactly what you need and you can kind of leave behind the rest. So when it comes to running processes like excuse me, clash detection, if you're running those kind of BIM coordination processes, you can make sure that you're not clashing against noise and you're not clashing against irrelevant data. You can actually isolate the elements that you're interested in, bring those into these coordination platforms and kind of work with them in a similar way as you would with the design data. And then the final thing I was just showing there in that video, which I kind of fell behind again, is you can drop this data either out as FBX, as I showed earlier, or straight up onto a BIM 360 platform. So you can really easily collaborate in the cloud. You can get it straight into Revizto via this FBX format and start sharing it project-wide. So that's a pretty, probably taken up quite a lot of time. Just those two workflows really are the kind of, as I said, they're ways of really leveraging this point cloud data in a slightly different way so that we're, as I said, in an easy to use and a kind of quick workflow, we're adding intelligence to the data and converting it into a format that is much more familiar to the kind of whole project team rather than the surveyor who's captured the data or point cloud experts. As I said, we do this in an easy to use way and it's an automatic process. So yeah, I think I've whittled on for long enough. I think I've rattled through all my bullet points here. But I think the key is the kind of next stage of the workflow, seeing what this data looks like in Revizto. So over to you, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely. So now it's time to see it all come together. So I think I need to stop sharing, and I'll hand the screen over to Sean Hester. There we go.
There we go. I think we're good here.
And off he goes. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mike, for walking through that. And, really what we wanted to do in this joint webinar was show how our two softwares really interact with each other. And having PointFuse's ability to convert those point clouds into much more manageable sizes means that we can open up this data to a lot of other people on the project. And that's one of the important things we really like to talk about here at Revizto. Mike hit on the numbers of the sizes of what that customer was doing, right? 110 gigs of information that's now condensed down to 3 gigs of information. That means that people can utilize this on an iPad easily and efficiently because that size is manageable. Now, Revizto can bring in point cloud files directly. We can bring in RCP, RCSs, right? But you're going to be limited into some of the devices and some of the users who can see that information. As far as how we bring that information into Revizto, we do have a direct importer here that allows us to bring that information in. if you know the coordinates, if the coordinates are the same based upon the information that you're having within the other models, you can see here we have not only our reality capture, but we also have a coordination model in this instance. You can pull those in directly. We also have the ability to pull that information in from Navisworks or Revit as well. Now I'm going to switch things a little bit up here, and I'm actually going to do the rest of my side of the presentation on an iPad. So I'm using a Reflector app right now to show, our Revizto app on an iPad. I'm working with a 2-year-old iPad Pro. The file that we're looking at right now, and I'm just going to zoom over to a different part of the model here. We actually have the RCP in this file as well. And the reason why that is we like to show the difference between the two. Years ago, utilizing a mesh file before software like PointFuse, some of those meshes came out just not ideal, right? It wasn't converting the mesh as well as the actual RCP was showing the points. But you can see here as I toggle this on and off, those pipes are coming through very well. If there's points in there, PointFuse is going to be able to change that into a very usable mesh, okay? Now, you can see a little bit of breaking up happening in some of these faces, but at the end of the day, if there's points there, they're going to be able to convert that information. And that's an important part, right? Because again, we're trying to make this usable for everybody on the project, converting this information to a much smaller, usable size of files for the rest of the users on your project. Now, again, this project we're looking at right now is an existing mechanical space where the customer, Victaulic, who is very nice to let us use these files, was able to use that reality capture to also see how their new piping was going to fit inside the space. Their new mechanical equipment was going to fit inside the space, right? The original point cloud was just over 10 gigs. The mesh that PointFuse was able to give us is just over 200 megabytes. That's a huge difference. Anyone on your project utilizing an iPad is probably going to be able to open this information. So just some other things as far as what happens once that is in Revizto, okay? Revizto is an integrated collaboration platform, an ICP. So what that means is we don't just bring in the 3D model information, the reality capture, and then those virtual prototypes. We also have a 2D side of Revizto as well. And this works to show where issues are located on a floor plan. It also allows us to leverage this information together. So we can do an overlay of the 2D on top of the 3D model, on top of the reality capture, right? So I have all this information at my fingertips that I can use. This isn't going to work with just some of those details. Anytime we see any of these green icons here on our Revizto interface on a floor plan or a detail or a section, we're going to be able to overlay that information, right? This allows us to verify that design intent versus the fabrication versus the actual existing conditions. And that can be a pretty powerful thing as you're comparing all that information together. All right, I'm just going to turn my section off right now, and let's actually jump down into the building itself. Now, I'm using our map tool right now to navigate around, and this allows me to double click anywhere inside this space, and Revizto is going to teleport me to that location, okay? Pretty quick and easy. And that's another part of Revizto that we love to talk about. The ease of use of being able to move around the space, even if I'm not a user who is, super comfortable navigating a 3D model, right? Right now I'm using our joystick, and then my right thumb is actually navigating around the space and changing my field of view, okay? So some other advantages to having the mesh. Two that I'm going to lay out right here is going to be measurement. Being able to measure a mesh is going to be much easier than measuring a point cloud, okay? Now with Revizto, I'm using our snapping measurement tool, which allows me to get that difference measurement down here at the bottom between the 2 points. So I can see the elevation of the underside of this piece of equipment is 2 foot 11 and 15/16. We're just going to round that up to 3 feet, right? But we can quickly and easily get that dimension based upon that mesh, utilizing that mesh. For Revizto to go and try to measure the points themselves, it's hard to interpret which of the 1 million points that are in this project that we're trying to actually measure. So those meshes help a lot in that instance. The other thing I want to point out is the section cut. So you saw me cut a section cut before with my floor plan, but we can obviously do this on the fly as well. And you can see here those meshes cut a nice, clean, easy to see section over the top of the building because we're cutting those spaces, okay? And then we can utilize those spaces to actually double tap on those, and that allows me to then cut a vertical section in here as well. Again, really just emphasizing that ease of use, seeing this information quickly and easily, right? And utilizing it and leveraging it, okay? Now I'm gonna go inside the project here again. We're gonna spin around. And one thing Mike hit on, which is really important, is that classification of the data, okay? Because up until this ability was available, you know, when I would click on a piece of the mesh, it would just say mesh, right? It would just say a face. Well, because of what PointFuse is able to do, we're actually able to classify this information. You can see here when I click the exit sign, it actually tells me it's part of fire and safety. As I click on this eye wash station here and I'm double tapping within my project on my iPad, I can see that that's part of health and safety, right? And as I continue going through the model here, you know, we can get some further clarification on what some of the stuff is by how it was classified. Here's a motor, right? Here's a tank within the project, okay? And this just provides another level of information that you can utilize, right? It's no longer what we would call kind of a dumb mesh, right? It's actually providing some informational value for you to use on the project and make some decisions, okay? So if I'm double tapping on here, and within here, you know what, we actually have an issue with one of these tanks. Let's say, you know, as we're going through and we're doing our inspections before we're actually fabricating some of this, you know, we realize, you know what, this also needs to be removed from the project, okay? Well, what we can do is we can highlight that as I did the double tap. I'm gonna click on our stamp tool, okay? And we're just gonna come in here and we're gonna say, all right, let's drop an RFI down in here as part of needing to replace this, right? We'll add that to our information. Now, the way Revizto has these stamps set up is we can template out the information of who gets assigned to them. You'll see here that Brett Settles is actually assigned to this. We have some watchers in here as well. We can add some additional identifiers. I can mark up this as well if I want to add some additional just context in what I'm calling out. Maybe if highlighting in blue isn't enough. And this goes into our issue tracker. This is just another part of that ICP that Revizto has for you guys to use, all right? And what that means is we can start to identify the accountability of who needs to take care of it. We have that record of any comments that were being made within here. And then the other aspect that's really important is we have our snapshot. We have our 3D view of the information, right? So I can get some additional context and what else might be happening here. Do we need to look at replacing anything else? And then where is this on a 2D floor plan, okay? Where is this on the actual floor plan? So we can give some identifiers to the team in, hey, this is that tank that needs to be replaced, okay? But it's all very helpful to have some of that classification there for us to use, right? You know, even if we're looking at this from just a standpoint of, you know, maybe it's an access issue. As we're actually taking some measurements in here, you know, what's the distance between these? Do I ever need to maintain, you know, those pumps over there? And is this enough space for me to get in there and maintain those? Well, if not, let's make sure that we're dropping an issue stamp down in here for access and just saying that we need to take a closer look at this. And you know what? This dimension is not going to be enough here, and we need to add some additional space. Let's move that that pad further out so we have some more space to get in there. But again, it all kind of starts with that usability of the information. As I said, you know, the iPad I'm using right now is 2 years old. It's an iPad Pro. You know, obviously you guys are seeing me navigate around here really easily. And the mesh allows some of that to happen, right? Having that smaller file size really makes it easier to push out to the rest of the project. And it doesn't even have to just be an iPad. This could be some less robust computers that you guys have with some of your team members, superintendents, PMs, PEs. You know, they don't necessarily have the same size machines as some of the VUC and BIM folks. So this allows us to really democratize this information, push it out to the rest of the team, and give everyone access to this just amazing information. And now with the ability to click on the info itself and get the actual information in the mesh is definitely a game changer as far as pulling that in here. So thank you guys for letting me showcase some of what Revizto has to offer, where we can combine these workflows with PointFuse and Revizto. I'm going to turn it back over to Sean Phillips, and then I think we're going to go into some Q&A with any questions that we weren't able to answer as we were chatting.
Yep. Thank you, Sean Hester. Seems like there's quite a few questions coming in. On our side, we have Brett Settles, who's the Global Director of Customer Success, answering those. So Brett, if you want to unmute and throw anything out that we can discuss live, let's go ahead and do that now.
Yeah, not a problem. Hey, everyone. I'm kind of the shadowy background person answering these questions with Mark. So some of the questions that we have coming in, I'll probably have to defer to the PointFuse guys. I was trying my best not to step on their toes a little bit, but let's go through here and look at some of these questions and see what all we can get to. Some of the questions, I think I'm going to skip by some of the ones that I think were answered by Sean's presentation, and then we'll talk here. So first question we'll dive into is how does PointFuse work with the defects of scanning? What instrument can be helped to cleaning the defects of scanning? So before I ask Mark to talk about this, I would imagine that this question relates to cleaning up noise or points from moving objects on site or anything like that. So Mark, is this handled through a typical cleanup or decimation process in the point cloud tool, or does PointFuse have anything specific for this?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've sort of, it's obviously quite common because you can't always get access on site to everywhere, especially with how terrestrial scanning and setups go. PointFuse doesn't fill any holes, but in terms of cleaning the data itself, from my experience, and I think Michael is the same as well, it's much easier in PointFuse when you've got a mesh model to select surfaces and objects, and basically we classify them out into a noise layer. When we're doing the classification, we create a noise layer, and we basically classify those objects out into that layer. We tend not to delete them actually, because it's always useful to maintain all the data information. So we find that a much quicker and easier process than trying to clean any point cloud data of, I don't know, people and site noise and things like that. And that's really how we deal with it. And it's difficult to say. I can't really comment on individual scanners and how they operate, but I think one of the probably important takeaways I would always say with the actual data capture side is really understanding, you know, why you're being commissioned to scan, what are you trying to achieve, and how you're trying to do it. So the scanning process, the capture process, is probably crucial to all the software processes that we do downstream, and how you work with that project. So I'd leave that as probably one of the key elements in terms of this workflow.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and any of us that have worked with point clouds know that there are various methods to clean up, right? And sometimes they're deployed in different manners, and really it's all about what end result are you shooting for, and what's the process to get there. What's the most logical process to get there? So the next question we have is, what about mixed reality in Revizto? I'm going to try to answer this. I don't know if I know exactly what the question is, but Revizto, where we found the value of PointFuse intersecting with Revizto is the ability to get some advanced, lightweight reality capture data in the hands of people who are not technology experts. Now, that creates a situation where we are mixing the reality capture with the drawings, we're mixing it with the model. But the other thing that we didn't mention on here too is that we do have a VR application, meaning that we can push these meshes and or point clouds into virtual reality, and as well as what we're seeing come out as these immersive caves. So there is a company that we've seen this quite a few times with called Igloo, and this is where they can push reality capture models, drawings, all the way into this very impressive immersive cave. We also work on iPads, as well as we are completely compatible with a video game controller. So I know that I threw a lot out there for that question. Hopefully some of that stuff stuck. And that's kind of where we are. So we do see, especially in like renovation projects and retrofit industrial projects, where these meshes are pushed into virtual reality for people like owners and owner representatives, various stakeholders, high-end management positions and things like that. So next question here, and let's see here. So we're going to go through here. Customization of the object property filters. So we have two different ways to look for object properties. And once again, I'm going to try to get this question. I don't know if I fully understand it, but I'll try my best here. Each issue has its own properties. So in each issue, there's assignees, there's watchers, there's tags, there's statuses, all of that, as well as clash detection metadata, and eventually also object data. And our filters are basically set up to where we can filter through various types of issues depending on what type of data is associated with it. Now, if we're talking about the actual object properties, that is where we can click on the object and it will reveal the properties that were infused with it by the authoring tool. So if it's Revit data, we can see all those Revit properties. If it's PointFuse data, we can see those PointFuse properties. And with Revizto, at this point, we do not create custom metadata. It's something that we may be delving into. But all of that metadata that you're seeing related to those objects was created in the tool that generated the data, and we allow you to read it. There is no ability to customize properties inside of these objects just yet in Revizto as it stands today. All right.
Is this for me? Yeah. I think we've got a question here. It says, are PointFuse meshes, mesh file sizes smaller than Scene2 cloud mesh file sizes? The simple answer to that, I don't know, because without actually comparing something like for like, it's really difficult to do that. And again, it would be unfair for me to say anything other than that, really. I know the guys at Scene2, and they produce a great product as well. So what I'm happy to do is, if you're a user of Scene2, for instance, and you've got a point cloud, you've created a mesh model, and you want us to convert PointFuse, and you can do your own comparison that way. I think that's probably the best way to tackle that. But I think our technique, as Mike said right at the beginning, the technique that we use does optimize that triangulation very much around the construction workflows. So I would hope that our meshes are optimized for file sizes as much as possible.
So I've actually compared the two.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it really, they are extremely similar in file size. And really what it comes down to is the amount of vertices that you're creating, not necessarily if the file came from PointFuse or Scene2. So it's always best to keep in mind, how many vertices are we creating? What is the accuracy of the mesh? And I found that usually the files output from both softwares usually fall within about 2% of each other if you are creating the mesh at the same LOA.
Yeah, okay, that's great to know. And I think there's actually a technique we do have in PointFuse as well when we're exporting, and what we recommend is that you click on a function called merge. So we merge the geometries once you've done the classification, and what that does, it actually reduces those vertices down to help optimize the mesh model.
Awesome. All right, so let's see here. So we've got a few, let me get through these real quick. So we also got a question about Visual Live. This is really interesting because we do have customers that are using Visual Live, and if I remember correctly, I sometimes I get my AR applications mixed up, but we do have a workflow with, I believe it might be Visual Live, but don't hold me to this, everyone in the audience, but any of these AR type systems, we've reached out to one of them that was a company that was working with one of our clients, and we didn't do a direct integration with them, but if these softwares are BCF capable, then we can begin to push and pull those issues back and forth that are found in that augmented reality environment into ours. I know that not all of them are BCF capable, but at some of the latest conferences before the virus thing happened, I talked to a few of them about generating BCF as a very, very good entry-level way to work with some of the issue tracking platforms that are out there. So there is no direct integration as of right now, but if that software is BCF capable, there is a very, very good workflow to get those issues in and out. All right, so another question, and we get this question a lot. We're talking about like the point cloud with real-time kind of LiDAR stuff. We're not there yet. This is something that we're going to have to talk to about, you know, potentially streaming this data in. But I do know that if the iPad, which has LiDAR, which is also part of this question, is able to produce any sort of file that we take in, there will also be a workflow there. And we do have the ability to work with quite a few of these point cloud files. And also, if we don't have the ability to work with it directly, we can always come in through one of our connections, which would be Navisworks or Revit or any of those. So the next one, Mark, may be more for you, but it's, is there a limitation on how many scans you can export out to a single mesh file?
Good question, actually, that is. Not really tried the limitation. The challenge one of the implementations we've done with PointFuse is we can take as many point clouds in as possible. That's not a problem. But we have something called super tiles. And the reason we have super tiles is to basically manage the data going back out of our software. So if we took, I don't know, a 200 gigabyte point cloud and created a mesh model in PointFuse, we'd be able to create that mesh model, but actually if we export it out, it won't be able to use it in any software because it'd be too big. So the way we manage it is actually we have something called super tiles, and therefore you can set those super tiles down to whatever size, but it's usually around 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabytes. So for instance, if you're using Navisworks, Navisworks, I think you could probably use up to a couple of gigabytes on a mesh model, but you wouldn't want to use anything more than that. So that's why we've implemented that sort of, not restriction, but that sort of workflow within PointFuse. So it's about managing data rather than using it as one big lump.
Awesome.
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and keep in mind, everyone, if we don't answer your questions completely, I know that Revizto is completely open to any correspondence, as I'm sure PointFuse is. So if you have any lingering questions, reach out to either of us, that's for sure.
I think, is that the next one mine as well? Maybe.
I believe that the rest of them, let's see here. We've got some more questions flowing in here, so let me get rid of this one. The next question from Michael, I think that's another one that would definitely be geared towards you, Mark.
Yeah, I'm going to give it to Mike. I know what the answer is, but I think he's gone very quiet and he needs to talk a little bit more. So there's some stuff we're doing on this which is quite interesting.
Which
Mike?
question, sorry, Mark?
From Michael around tagging and doing repeat scanning, which is something that we're trying to work towards to promote regular scanning, especially on the construction site, to help sort of verification processes. So I think you're asking if objects are tagged or classified once and scanned again and re-imported, is the original data retained or wiped away? There's something we've got in the house that we're working on which will actually maintain the original classification tag and only look at converting what's changed as opposed to what hasn't. Pretty much, Mike. So I'm looking for you for help there.
Yeah, no, that's all right. You explained it quite nicely. Yeah, so we're working on a almost producing a remainder cloud is the kind of way that I'm thinking about it. And we're able to compare a classified mesh model with the next point cloud coming in. So exactly as you said, Mark, by performing that comparison, rather than remeshing the entire site, what we're actually doing is removing those points that have already been classified, removing those completely, and then meshing everything else. And so you start building up a single model within PointFuse that gradually gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you as more stuff gets built. So yeah, no, it's something we've been working on for a little while in the background now, but it's sort of coming to fruition in the next sort of 12 months or so, hopefully.
Awesome. So I don't know who this is for. So Michael also asked, have you guys ever integrated with Unity? So,
sorry, I was just typing an answer there. Sorry about that.
So if it's for us, we are a Unity-based tool. PointFuse, go for it.
So yeah, obviously therefore we work with Unity. But yeah, no, so FBX again is the way into Unity. So we don't have a direct link with the platform itself, but because FBX is a nice standard sort of 3D model file, then that can you can drop that straight into Unity platform. And then we I know there is a sort of up and coming direct integration that Unity have released that we are sort of looking into. So good to know that that's something you'd be interested in, because it's something that we can definitely look into further.
Awesome. So then we have just kind of a verification on a question that was asked earlier, but it was, so PointFuse's super tiles essentially divide one point cloud into several smaller mesh files. Is this true?
It sort of, what it does is PointFuse on the process will divide the point cloud into lots of little tiles, and then we use that as part of the multi-core processing to create the mesh tiles. The mesh tiles, when they're assembled back together, that's when they're assembled into super tiles. So if you don't, rather than assembling them as one big mesh model, they're assembled into basically super tiles. So they don't represent the point cloud so much, or how the point cloud is divided up to. It represents the data size that you've set. So if you've set it to 4 gigabytes, don't produce any tile bigger than 4 gigabytes, then that's what the software will do when it will bring everything back together.
And just to supplement that answer a little bit, each one of those super tiles, so it obviously keeps the file size to a manageable size. So it's actually less of an issue in Revizto because it can handle larger meshes than most. But what it does have the effect of, you can end up with quite degraded texturing. So basically that one file with all that geometry will have an individual texture file associated to it. And so that one file spread over a large area, you end up with much lower quality texturing than if you've actually got lots of these super tiles, each with their own texturing. So if you are looking to produce, especially going to Unity or something like that, a much cleaner texture. So like in the example that we were seeing today, where you can read the eyewash stage and things like that, you can use this super tiling to produce this much higher quality texturing, and then you can still export it into this kind of single file. But it gives you that flexibility to kind of yeah, to make a much visually more kind of pleasing mesh.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. All right. So, oh boy, the questions are still coming. Here we go. All right. Let's see here. So I am going to start picking some of these so we can begin to wrap up. Do you have tools to convert meshes to objects? So do you guys have a scan to BIM part of your application, or is it all meshing?
Yeah, no, that's glad that came up actually. Yes, we do. We've probably the last 6 months we've had a new tool called Space Creator, and based on using the Ifc Classification template, when you classify mesh surfaces into certain layers like walls, doors, and windows, the software will automatically fit basically a Revit family placeholder around that object. So basically creating parameterized walls, doors, and windows. So that sort of starts to address some of the LOD 200 workflows, which we around sort of space management. But as you can see, we're doing that from the mesh itself, and then over time we're adding to that process to add more objects as we go along.
Awesome. All right. Next question from Mark Seaver. Can you guys see that?
How many devices am I allowed to use software? Currently work from home. Basically, you can get, it's a similar to Autodesk, so it's a user count driven. It's one concurrency per license, but we do have options for actually having multiple concurrencies from a single license. So the trial version doesn't work on virtual machines, but you could install it on the office-based machine and work remotely. But there's a few restrictions on how you actually work remotely. Some software works really well, some doesn't. So we can give you some advice on how to do that. I mean, basically we do that in we're doing that at the moment as we speak because of because of lockdown.
Awesome. So if this question was about Revizto, the way we work is it's essentially a cloud-based assigned user license. So you give a license to a user based on an email address, and they can access the software from multiple devices simultaneously. There is a limit. I believe the limit is 3 devices at the same time, which would allow for concurrent use of VR, PC, and iPad all at once. All right, so does PointFuse have the ability to slice up the scanned RCP file in PointFuse and export out several different mesh files? I believe we somewhat answered this, but does that go back to the super tiling conversation we were having?
I think it does, without sort of getting down into the detail around it. But basically, we've got all the tools in PointFuse to slice, as you say, and crop out parts of the point cloud from the RCP. Again, if you're looking at doing it automatically, then we have tiling options as well, how you tile that data. So there's a few things there, and I'm happy to try and do an offline call and go into details actually how it works and set up a demo for you as well.
Awesome. All right. So one of the questions, this is a good one. So Jim Gleason asked this question, and this will be the last question we're taking. If any of the questions went unanswered, absolutely reach out to us. Both of the companies would love to have a detailed conversation about your needs. But last question here before we go, does PointFuse have any kind of automated construction verification notifications or reports? So I would imagine here it's one of those situations where, we've got a model, we throw the model up there, we have then installed that device, we go out, we scan it. Does that installed device or equipment match up with the model? And if not, how far off is it?
Yeah, not in PointFuse, not in PointFuse at the moment.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining today. Today was, we kept a lot of attention throughout the webinar. It's a kind of a new topic and something that us at Revizto, we love what PointFuse is doing. PointFuse is essentially making this data more manageable and accessible. And we are using our product to bring that to the field and bring reality capture out into the field. As many people have heard, as I've talked on these webinars, one of the biggest difficulties in the early days of reality capture was, all right, we captured it. Now one person can use it. As we push into the future, it's going to get more important for this data to be accessible to everyone, just like with models and drawings and anything that these individuals need to make a decision on. And bringing it all together in context and allowing communication around it is very important to us. And that's why we felt there's a lot of value in bringing these two tools together today. As we move forward, and I'm sure the PointFuse guys would agree with me, there will probably be further advancements built on our relationship here, but we'll see what the future holds. Any of the other panelists, you guys got anything to say before we sign off?
I think the one thing I would just echo that you said, Brett, is, if we didn't answer any questions, if you guys want further clarification on any of this stuff, Revizto or PointFuse, please reach out to either company. We're happy to answer anything you guys have. We tried to keep this somewhat high level so we could take some of those more specific questions as they came in and then speak to you guys on an individual basis as you had more questions. But yeah, a big thank you from me for everyone who jumped on. If anyone else wants to say anything.
No, just thank everybody for your time this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, whenever it is.